ask if you wanted. Excellent. Okay, so kicking us off, one concern has been working with the city of Seattle since 2018, primarily through the Office of Emergency Management. Barb Graff, the previous director, brought us on and was very interested in working with us. So that's how we got connected. The city has been using One Concern's technology product. It's just a website that you go to for various things, and I've listed some of them here. That includes looking at potential impacts of an unreinforced masonry mitigation policy and various levels of what that could look like. Kind of looking at the potential for impacts from earthquakes through a race and social justice and equity lens. Creating and kind of testing an emergency feeding plan for school children, which came in handy during the pandemic, and looking at shelter supply caches. So where should they be located? How much supplies should there be? And are they meeting the needs of the local population? We were introduced to the Hubs team in late 2020, and we've been working together fairly heavily since about February. And we've kind of identified two main project areas to focus on, the first of which we'll be presenting for you guys today, which is looking at hub safety using earthquake simulations, and the second of which is kind of talking about potential community impact of earthquakes on areas nearby the hubs and around those hubs. So we're going to dive in a little bit on the background needed to understand how we're looking at hub safety using these earthquake simulations. So I'm going to talk to you about those earthquake simulations in the coming slides. Okay, quick disclaimer, since we're using kind of technical tools, I just want to reiterate that we're looking at earthquake simulations. These are simulations of a potential event that could occur in the future. It is not a prediction, though. We are not saying this is the definite example of what is going to certainly happen in Seattle. These are examples of what possibly could happen using science and physics and geology and technology to be able to make as data-driven models as we possibly can, but these are not predictions. I take that word very seriously. These are simulations of what could happen. So hopefully that's clear to everyone. And if people have more questions about that, we can dive in. By the way, my background is I'm a geologist. I have a PhD in geology, so I could talk your ear off about earthquakes, but we're not going to go into that right now. Okay, so a little bit about us as a company and the earthquake simulations that we've produced that have helped in this project. So One Concern was founded a little over 5 years ago. We're a technology company that joins disaster science and machine learning and artificial intelligence with the intention of helping our users to kind of uncover their blind spots and see risks that maybe they didn't know they had, and help them to make decisions that are driven by data with the overall goal of making disasters less disastrous. Okay, so how do we do that? So the first step is kind of assess the impacts of different natural hazards. We're looking at earthquakes together, but we also look at floods, and we'll be doing kind of hurricanes in the near future as well. But so looking at earthquakes, how they impact businesses, organizations, communities by kind of modeling the infrastructure that they have. What are the buildings? What are the lifelines in the community? And looking for vulnerabilities so that the people who are using our product can take action to reduce their risk and minimize what they could face in the future. Okay, so how do we build these models? So we use kind of 3 different realms of data. So one is the built environment. So we're looking at building data and information. We have hundreds of thousands of data points about buildings. That's not some ethereal number, that's real. We have hundreds of thousands of data points about buildings that cover how tall buildings are, what they're built out of, when they were built, and so on. That helps us make an assessment of how a building will respond when exposed to earthquake shaking. So all of that is really important for us to be able to make an assessment of will the building be damaged or not. We also have demographics information that helps us understand who will be impacted, and that's based on census data. And then we also look at the natural environment. So when the ground shakes, different geologic and subsurface factors indicate how strongly it will shake at the surface. And there's other factors that come into play there. But by combining all of these, we're able to make models that say which buildings will likely be damaged in an example of shaking in a scenario event. Okay, so how can we help the hubs team? So the first thing is to be able to look at your assets, your hubs, and see what's vulnerable to seismic risk. So are you A-okay, or is it likely that you're maybe going to experience some disruption in the area around the hub, near the hub? Who might they need to serve? That goes into this next one, looking at demographics. So looking at vulnerable populations and making sure that kind of who will be impacted around our hubs. And then last but not least, this one is kind of looking at overall resilience, and it can help with like sanity checking, the need to maybe relocate sites against hypothetical earthquakes that may cause damage to the area. So looking at what hubs are vulnerable for you guys. Okay, next slide. So here are some simulations. So essentially what you're looking at here are 6 different simulations that the kind of hub captain working group has looked at to make their assessments, and I'm going to take you through them. All you really need to know is that darker colors means more buildings damaged on this map. Okay, so this is the Nisqually earthquake. And you can see that there's some damage. It's a little hard to see the downtown area just because there's so many streets, but there's a little bit of damage, but not very many buildings. If it was darker colors, you'd see more buildings damaged. But so this is not a lot of buildings that are damaged in the Nisqually earthquake, but that's the one that we all remember. That's the most recent damaging earthquake that we have. So that's a good reference point. This is a scenario of the Devil's Mountain Fault, which is not visible on the map, but it's outside of the city. And it's a 7.5. It's pretty far away from the city, but there would be a little bit more damage in some places caused by Nisqually. You'll notice a pattern here with Harbor Island, by the way. So it keeps getting worse. Then moving on to a magnitude 6.9 on the Tacoma Fault, we start seeing some more heavy damage concentrated in the south part of the city. Moving on to a magnitude 7.5 on the southern Whidbey Island Fault, which is up here, we see quite a bit more damage starting to pop up. You see a lot more of those darker purple colors starting to poke up around, and there's generally a darker shade of purple to the whole city, which means more buildings that are kind of damaged around the city. Then you guys have all heard of the Cascadia subduction zone earthquake. That's a big magnitude 9 or larger earthquake that a lot of the region is planning for. It was the subject of that New Yorker article, if you ever read that. But you can see there's fairly widespread places around the city where there would be at least 1 or 2 buildings expected to be damaged at every little data point. And then the pièce de résistance, the really bad one for the city is a direct hit. So this would be a magnitude 7.2 scenario on the Seattle Fault. The fault runs through the map here. You can see the epicenter, and this red line is actually the fault. This will come into play in a lot of the discussions that we're having about impacts to hubs. But you can see there's quite extensive heavy damage in the south part of the city. And even in the north, there's still kind of widespread some damage everywhere, but there's widespread heavy damage and high numbers of buildings heavily damaged in the south part near the fault. So that's a quick run through. There's a second version of this slide where we're looking at kind of percentage of impacts. So if it's a high percentage of buildings in an area that are heavily damaged, it shows up as red. This is Nisqually again, showing a beginning place for us to start from. So blue is not a lot of damage. Yellow is kind of moderate damage. So we see a little bit of moderate damage around the core of Seattle. And then kind of moving through the different simulations, you start to see more moderate damage around the city in the Tacoma Fault scenario. Whidbey Island, you start to see a little heavier damage popping in towards the north part of the city. Cascadia actually is really interesting. It picks up some interesting patterns that you'll kind of notice throughout these 3 simulations. where you have along the Duwamish corridor, anywhere that you've got soft sediments, you're going to have heavy damage, and you're more likely to have heavy damage in an earthquake. So you've got Inner Bay and along the Duwamish that pop up in some way in most of these scenarios. And then coming back over to the magnitude 7.2 on the Seattle fault, it's just a high percentage of damage pretty much everywhere. And even in the north, where it's a little further from the fault, there's still widespread moderate damage, most places with heavy damage sprinkled throughout as well. So that's a quick overview of the different simulations. And now I'm going to turn it over to Cindy to hand over to the various hubcaps.
So you can imagine that as we were looking at those scenarios, you know, we're freaking out over the reds, the bright purples. And so that's what's taken us to the point where we said, calm down, understand what you're looking at. Let's make it useful in a very small way first. And so West Seattle, our Southwest sector, was one of the first ones who set up hubs. And we literally just went, who's got a community group who wants to sponsor a hub, and where's your nearest park? So we knew that when we put one in Alki, we kind of went, gee, we're kind of close to the sound, and, you know, maybe we should think of a plan B for that one, but we had no data. You know, it was just like, that was really early in the days in the city. Frank actually hauled out the other day his 2005 map that they had to make special for us because there was no way to get liquefaction or tsunami information. So what we did, as she said, is we combined the one concern, you know, highlighting, and then we also went back to those hazards that are now captured on Hazard Explorer so that we could, you know, really dive down into specifically at each hub. And then we also, most of us who did this project either use Google Maps or we drove every hub, because we know that there are some hubs that the P-patch ones are under high power lines. And there's a couple that are in parks with really towering trees. And Patty Petish was really concerned when we were setting up hubs in parks that there was a couple she said no to just because of the danger of trees toppling. So when I did the Southwest sector, and I told people I would go first, so that, like, I'll field all the questions, everybody, and then everybody behind me will know what to expect. So I'm moving my mouse, but you can't see it. But, you know, the Southwest sector here is cut off by the Duwamish. So everything to the west side of that Duwamish. And what we found when we did that is that between the combination of those three things, we actually had a hub that's in a very poor location. It's in a liquefaction zone. It is, the box is about 20 feet away from the building, which is an unreinforced masonry building. And they were planning on setting up in their parking lot, which was, now we realize, could be full of unreinforced masonry rubble. So we might move their box, you know, half a block to a bigger open space, or keep the box there and just say, you're going to plan on setting up at this kind of half block open space area instead of in their parking lot. So that's kind of like, that was the aha for South Park. And then we had the three other hubs in this that came up as, you know, potential locations. So the Fauntleroy Church is on a landslide slope, and we knew that, you know, but it had been terraced into three parking lots, and they're under a tremendous amount of trees. So it's just, the box is, they still don't have a box. They store their stuff in an outside shed of their church. And that's in a pretty safe location. And it was where they were planning on setting up their hub on the third tier of their parking thing. And we're thinking now that they might want to shift that around. Hector is with the Salvation Army. Hector's one of the new hub captains for us here in West Seattle. And if you could really zoom in, you could see that fault line running, you know, right through the block that his building is on down there at the bottom. So they're in a new building, but it's just the potential for damage in his two parking lots that are around him. So just having that discussion about what to do. And then I already mentioned Alki, you know, they fortunately where their hub was outside the tsunami zone, but it's just, you know, if an earthquake happens at a king tide day, you know, all bets off. So they're they've been talking about a plan B. They always had a plan to relocate uphill. But the good thing is we used the hazard map to look at where they had assumed they were going to go to. And that is also on a landslide area. So now they're going to find a secondary spot that's not got some threat underneath the ground. So the third part of when we did this analysis, was just the mind-boggling, oh my God, the Seattle fault looks so bad. To be able to talk to people, like if Hector wasn't a hub captain, we might still be going to talk to the Salvation Army going, you are an important asset in our neighborhood and community, and we want you to be aware of, the potential of the damage that this fault earthquake could do. And the other place that fault line runs right through is our Kenny Senior Home, which is in my hub's territory. And, I forgot to put Morgan on here. We had to put some of these on individually. My hub is just north of the fault line there. And so, making sure the Kenny home has got a response plan. They know what to do. They've done building inspections. They've got an architect on staff. So we plan to have some community conversations in a way that is not going to scare the bejesus out of people, but just says, there's some other things you should think about besides just packing a kit for 2 days. What else do we want to encourage people to do? As we talk through this, several of the hub captains are concerned about, if this gets out into the community unfiltered, like how Debbie gave us kind of like here's the science, here's the logic. It's not a promise, but here's the potential. We need to help manage that conversation. And so we'll talk about that part of the project afterwards, but you can see how bright red Southwest is. And so we were happy that we didn't actually have anything other than the South Park hub that needed to really move. Questions on the Southwest sector? Yeah, I forgot to mention Peace Lutheran is in our very high dense, business area. And so, just how they want to plan to respond. We can now see the damage that they might have to deal with. And then Mount St. Vincent is not on the fault line, at least, but again, it's showing in a block that's got some damage, and we want to think about how to have that discussion. So if there's no questions for Southwest, I will go to the Central Core. And I'm going to continue because Margaret has a family reunion she's at. So she did the analysis for Central Core. Out of those, there's just really 2 that they're really kind of focusing on. And she's starting to talk to the hub captains. The Belltown Olympic Sculpture Park, their box is underneath a concrete flooring in the parking lot. And so there's just questions about it's the best location because the public can't access it. And so we don't have the vandalism problems. But if you've got rubble, pulling the stuff out of the box, or if we don't think that the floor will collapse because it's a fairly new building. But when they have done practices, they always set up so that the glass facade is their hub. They tape all the stuff to the glass facade. So with the possible shaking and damage, we might need to have a plan B for that. Just you're going to string it up and tape it to the walls of the sculpture garden, or the sculptures are going to become your new hub stands. And then the other one is West Edge is in a super high crowded area right off the Pike Place Market. They're not really happy with where their hub box had to go, but it was the only place the market authority could allow them to do it because of the historic nature of the property. So they're waiting for Peter Steinbrook Park to get redeveloped so that they can see if they can relocate over into a more open space for them to have a response area. So that's the two concerns down in the Central Core. Any questions about that? Oh, Erica says, okay, Erica's got questions about the Science Incorporated, and I'm going to hold on those until we get through all the hub presentations, because once we get through the hub presentations, they're like, good, done, safety done, and then we go on to the science and how do we talk to the community about this. And let me make sure I didn't miss anybody else's chat. Okay, so next one then after Central Core. So Hugh, I'm so sorry I hadn't heard from you. And yeah, Victor Steinbrook Park, yes, to Catherine. Hugh, did you have the chance? Cheryl is out of town, so the team of Hugh and Cheryl haven't been able to work together. So I don't know where Hugh is on his analysis.
Okay, well, yeah, Cheryl's been busy. She did a little bit, and we did one session sort of together, looking mainly at the hubs in Northwest sector and using, this is the same scenario, I recognize it. And basically our hubs, the ones that we know are active or should be, the communications hubs, are in good sites. So
Good.
we didn't see any issues there where the hub boxes are or anything like that. As far as what we would expect, that what area might be having to service people more, the more severe quakes, the hillsides to the north, North Beach, and to the west along above Shill Shoal could result in the worst damage or dislocation to buildings and people requesting services or seeking help and that kind of thing. And that's mostly either Crown Hill or Loyal Heights hubs that serve those areas that we found were more affected. So as far as where our equipment and boxes are located, we didn't see any significant issues. The worse it is, the worse it is. That's, but
Good. Okay. I'm glad. I'll fill out this slide, then we'll have a deck that we can put the link to for other people to come back and look at. So,
okay.
any questions for Hugh? Cool. Thank you very much, Hugh. On to the next one. So Northeast, Anne is on. She is in a place where she's got spotty internet. So she worked over this with me. And so I'm going to present for her, but she's available for questions. So Northeast turned out to have kind of like two effects. Almost all of us in the South End went, it's the Seattle fault. And that's the one we used as our baseline. But we saw that Seattle fault really impacts mostly the southern part of her sector, but the South Woodby fault affects the north part of the sector more. So if you go to the next slide, that's what the analysis ended up doing. We just did a Frankenstein sort of map. Oops, other way. And we instead of using one to talk everything, we just stitched the two together. This won't happen because hopefully we won't have a South Woodby fault and a Seattle fault at the same time. But when we did that and we went through all the steps, there were no hubs that turned out to be under, because it's not quite as red as some of the other parts of the city. No hubs ended up needing, firm, let's get these moved. There is one hub where their box is in an area that's under landslides, and they need to go back and have a discussion. They need to stand on that property and look at it. And that's the Meadowbrook. They're by a church in a flat parking lot. And so we really have to see how close they are to what the hazard map showed was a landslide area. So that one, we need to go put more eyes back on that and have some discussion. And then this has sparked the conversations about where's the damage and what parts of the community, and that's still yet to come too. Questions about Northeast? Anne, did you have anything you wanted to add?
No, Cindy, thanks.
Okay,
You covered
good.
it well.
I just was making sure you were still on there. So.
Oh, this is Gabrielle. I'll just toss my comment out and maybe we can address it later. I'm looking at Magnuson Park and I know there's a lot of fill in there and that's what's all red there. And yet we also hear the city talk about that as a possible staging location for troops or helicopters or a giant mortuary if such a thing was needed. So I'm just, obviously they know that that's there, but it's just something in our brains as well, I guess we have to think about.
And then Matt put a comment in about the large URM building close to their box. And that is true. It's to the north and the box is at the very southern end of all the buildings. And so we kind of went, I'm not sure you're going to have to relocate because hopefully the rubble's up at the north end.
Well, it's actually, I don't know if the gymnasium is unreinforced, but it's within about 12 feet of the box. So if that did collapse, it would be,
So we need to talk,
We can
because
look
that's
at-
not,
yeah,
that's
we
not what
can
the
look at
map
that
was
map.
showing.
okay. I have aerial photos.
Right.
We can check it out, Matt.
Okay.
Yeah.
And to Gabrielle's point, I think a lot of Magnuson, there's so few buildings and they're so old that the ones that are there are very vulnerable. It looks dramatically red, but I think that's because there's very few buildings and many of them are vulnerable. I'm not sure what I'm trying to say, except there's a lot of land that's probably
got
going
it.
to be
So
okay.
it's,
Yeah.
it's not
That
so much
makes sense.
liquefaction, it's
Yeah.
structural damage.
And it's got
Yeah.
liquefaction as well. Yeah, okay, thank you.
I think the
Gotcha.
fill after the base closed was on top of existing land. I don't think that they pushed the land out.
There's a couple spots where they did because there was a wetland and then they put in a new wetland. So I think
Mm.
that was, there might be some areas still that have filled in them.
Hey, Matt, can I double check with you? You're saying that the gym is an unreinforced masonry building?
I'm not certain, but
Oh, okay. I was
yeah,
going, they were supposed to have finished all their URM fixes because they fixed Hiawatha and a couple other ones. So I was going, oh my God, I hope
when I
there's
looked
one
at
still out
the
there.
map, it looked like the community center was still listed there, but I don't know if what the gym,
Okay.
how it's attached or if they're the
Okay,
same.
we'll follow up with you. Good, thank you. So question, how is Solid Ground organized? Solid Ground, it's the residents at Solid Ground who created the Magnuson hub box. And so the hub box is at the rear of the community center there. And the Solid Ground people are the ones who've been practicing on responding. Any other questions for Northeast? Make sure I didn't miss any other chats. Yeah, Debbie said there's a database of unreinforced masonry buildings, but also on the Hazard Explorer map, which it shows every single one. They're dots all over. So you get it's easier than going to the list. You get the visual of, and that was how I found the South Park, like, oh crap.
I did see that. It's just hard to tell with the red dot.
Yeah,
really means.
where it is.
And
Okay.
Matt, I'll throw my email in the chat and you can email me the address and I can check it against the list I have.
Okay.
Great, thank you. All right, I don't see any other chat questions. So, okay, so on to Central West, Frank.
Yeah, do you hear me, Cindy?
I do.
Okay. Yeah, we went with the 3 hubs that actually had people staffing it right now: West Magnolia, West Queen Anne, and Church of Scientology. And none are under consideration of those for relocation. I do have a note about the big trees bordering the West Magnolia hub. We got to have a conversation there for first alternate to go to. And the West Queen Anne hub has 12 high light poles with about 4 to 5 lights on top of each. And depending upon the radius at which they fall on, it could be really serious. So Bill and I'll have a conversation on that with the Queen Anne people. The question with the Scientology on the tsunami, I did some close reading of the Seattle Hazard Explorer. There's a video on there that shows what a 7.3 tsunami would look like. It comes very close to the 07 map. The church is a block and a half away from the eastern edge of the liquefaction and et cetera. But they're expecting to model a 6.7 at some point, because that's supposed to be far more probable to occur. And remember, these 0.7 to 7.7 to 7.8 is an 10 order of magnitude. Okay, so I think what they're reading on this one map right now, given what they're projecting would possibly happen, is going to be less than perhaps what's on the map that we're looking at now, this paper map. Yeah. So yeah, and the other takeaway was have a backup list of relocation sites for all 3 hubs that we agree on, and that we go down and check them off in order. Say West Queen Anne's not occupiable. We all agree these are the first 3 backups you look at, or West Magnolia, and go from there. So any questions?
So Frank, not specific to Central West, but Mike Ruby, this goes back to Hughes area because when we have merged sort of North Central and Northwest together, Mike asked, what sort of problem will we have with the zoo? So I don't think that we've gotten to that community level discussion, which is Frank's third bullet. There's definitely some impact areas, and that's where now that this first project's done, we can go back and start asking those questions. And the St. John, the church, the hub at St. John Lutheran, they've asked that question before, hey, we've got good news, bad news. We've got the big open spaces of the zoo right across from their hub. They've got some big areas that aren't fenced in by the zoo. And then bad news, we have all those animals there and hopefully they've got a plan. So that's a good discussion for that area to have.
And then the zoo does have a plan, and the last thing they evacuate are the poisonous snakes.
Seriously, are you serious?
We were senior zoo walkers for about 3 or 4 years. And in those conversations, yes, the most dangerous critters were the last to leave.
I don't know. Some of the hub captains have been around long enough. One of our first 2 field exercises, we had the zoo animals escaping.
Right.
All right, so the next hub we've got is the Central East, and that'll be Tom. And I didn't catch if Diane Beverly had joined yet.
I don't think Diane's going to be here. Sounds like she has some personal things going on.
Okay.
So yeah, here I am. So we did the Seattle fault scenario as well, because that was pretty much everything else was anywhere close to the damage this one showed. And we did all the hubs that were not P patches, obviously. So some of these are still kind of in flux, but here's what we got. Out of these, most of them are in parks. So other than potentially access to or power lines, trees, that kind of thing, some potential of whatever structures may be there, there's really not a whole lot of worry that they wouldn't be able to set up somewhere in the park. So other than maybe hub box placement and certain other possible local hazards, to assess, shouldn't have to do anything else. The 3 that had potential issues, Braeburn Condos is a newer construction building, but it's definitely taller. And I don't know where they're planning on putting their hub inside there, but there is a courtyard, but of course it's surrounded by building. So I would say that they definitely need to have some alternatives. I know there's a couple of parking lots still standing around that area and a couple of small parks they could look at. But they should be ready to move if as necessary, because anything major would definitely make it difficult to be in that condo complex. But I don't think Gina's here today. So the other 2 that might have to look at something up at Volunteer Park, the church there. I've done a drive-by on Google Maps and I went close there on my bike yesterday. They do have a parking lot, probably okay there, but it is surrounded by other buildings, low-rise buildings in this case. Possibly some power lines in the alley and that kind of thing. So they should definitely think about an alternate. If MLK Fame is down there, there actually is kind of a little bit of liquefaction zone down there in the bottom of the valley. And even though they have a low-rise building and they have a little bit of parking lot, again, depending on where they put their box, there may be some issues with things collapsing on it. There is a lot of open area in that vicinity. They have the Bush School with some of their recreation areas right next door, so it should be okay. But those are the only 3 that I think would have to be significant. Otherwise, everything else seemed pretty cool, pretty clear.
Great. Any questions for Tom? Okay, and then I think our last one will be Southeast sector, and that Andy has been doing that as the techno assist for Ron, and Ron has I think he had a conflict tonight. I know he always has Thursday night as a conflict, but so Andy's going to present.
Yeah. Okay, so like she said, I'm here on behalf of Ron, who couldn't make it. In the way of background, I lived in Belltown for 4.5 years and established the hub there. I'm living out in Maple Valley now. So I used both the Seattle Hazard Explorer and One Concerns information. One Concerns, I put that into a spreadsheet for anyone who cares. I think I sent it to Cindy, but I'll probably send it again and send it to Ron. What I found going through here, probably only 2 hubs that really had safety concerns for. I should back up too. I started doing a more exhaustive analysis beginning with the Rainier Beach hub, and it became pretty apparent, especially after communicating with Cindy, that there just wasn't time to do that and make this meeting. So I'm hoping we can do a follow-up with that. But one of the concerns was actually Rainier Beach hub. They're building It's owned by VFW. It's a community center. It was built in 1923 when I looked up the tax assessor records on it. And I'm pretty sure, unless it's been retrofitted, that structure is not attached to the foundation. So there could be a concern of the structure separated from the foundation in the event of a significant quake. And Ron said that their supplies are in a shed on the property, not physically inside the building. But that's something certainly worth being aware of if the building was being used to house people. So anyway, that's one. The other, I'm not sure how to pronounce that. Is that Dayon Park? Cindy, do you know?
Dijon.
Dijon, thank you.
Well, Dijon.
Dijon, thank you. The guidance I have for that is that they meet in a pavilion in the park, and technically that park is okay, but right across the street is a liquefaction zone. And Cindy had indicated that the hub supplies are actually being stored in a residence. So possibly those supplies could be in the liquefaction area. So we'll need to dig into this a lot deeper. Generally speaking, most of the hubs are in relatively safe locations, but it certainly is good for the hub volunteers to be aware of surrounding areas that have concerns. So like Rainier Vista, pretty much everything between them and Lake Washington is a landslide area. Not only potential landslides, but historic landslides too. So, and several hubs have that. So that could guide, that could guide their decisions in where they decide to send people to do inspections and such. But I've got those listed in here, the ones that had adjacent areas that were a concern.
Hey,
So,
Andy, there's a
yeah.
question specifically about Dijon. She
Okay.
knew it was in a landslide, but wasn't aware it was liquefaction. And it's not quite clear that all those listed are both liquefaction or is it and or an or.
Okay, my recollection, I'd have to go back and look at the spreadsheet, was that it was liquefaction, but no, they're not all both.
Okay.
This is just kind of a really high level overview of things. So that my
Yeah.
recollection was that it was liquefaction.
Yeah, so this is good if you're hub captain, you're going, oops, I want to go verify that. Go to just Google Seattle Hazard Explorer. It's a city website, and you'll be able to look your own hub up really quick because you just put in your address and it'll zoom you right down.
Yeah, my intent with this, and I've communicated with Cindy, is that ultimately as a follow-on, we sit down and do a pretty exhaustive analysis of a lot of these issues, like the one with the building age that I uncovered with Rainier Beach. And I proposed putting it in a narrative form, which I think is a lot more usable for the hub volunteers. So anyway, as far as the rest of it, no big surprise. Got a lot of faults right below this sector. That I'm not sure how important that actually is, your actual proximity to the fault. The Loma Prieta quake, I remember that one, it physically opened up a big crack in the ground. Other than that, I'm not sure how much of a concern it is, but pretty much with all the other scenarios showed Seattle faults the biggie, secondary ones at Cascadia. Most of the remaining ones are not a major concern. Rainier Beach has an elementary school about 2 blocks away, and one concerns database shows that as a URM. So that's probably something worth noting. Another is that several of these hubs have local business districts within a few blocks and quite a few URMs there. So they don't directly affect the hub, but probably good to know. The demographic information, I'm not sure how important that is for the hub, certainly important for city planners. Overall, about an average of 10% of the local population for each of those hubs is seniors. It's a pretty broad category. I mean, I've been a senior for 5 years and I still do pretty well. So anyway, questions?
Great
Concerns?
analysis.
Okay, I'm done.
And Ann's put the link to the Hazard Explorer, but you can get there several ways. So Andy really is, out there for what we think our next steps are. I mean, every one of us now it's taken us 3 to 4 months to learn this tool and understand what we're doing. And you don't do it for 3 weeks and you come back and you go, oh my God, I forgot what all these numbers mean. So it's, we have felt not comfortable having a conversation with our community because we don't understand the tool well enough to defend the science. So, you know, that's been Debbie's role, is to keep reminding us how it works and, you know, how, what a 3.0 means and how the 10% seniors affected. But really what Andy was referring to is, as you look at your own little hub area, you're going, oh God, you know, there's some things in here I want to talk about. I see an unreinforced masonry building on the, sorry, smoke coming up out the window. I was like, oh, wow, that's a big barbecue. And so she's got a feature on the One Concern where you can click on a hub and it opens up a radius so that we can go understand how many seniors live in proximity to your hub. But right now it's set at 3 kilometers, which in hub world turns out to be really big. It's like many of our hubs overlap if you're at that sort of a range. So we're looking at, can she get a 1 kilometer radius so that you can just go click on your hub and go, well, and this is, you know, how many seniors live near me. This is, and we're all waiting for the census information to get updated. So we have current census. And Debbie, if you want to
Yes.
jump in on that.
Yeah, so on the 1 kilometer versus 3 kilometer thing, I think they're at 1 kilometer now. So I think everything should be good to go on 1 kilometer. And then we'll double check that, but I'm pretty confident that that's there.
Debbie,
and then-
this is Andy. As of about a week ago, they were not all at 1
Right.
kilometer.
2 days ago, they were at 3 kilometers because
Yeah.
Frank and I were doing it. And,
It was a mixed bag.
oh, okay.
Huh.
So
Well, anyway, so whether it gets to 1 kilometer or you go, my hubs, like Frank has got a huge area. He's not going to serve just 1 kilometer. He's the only active hub in Magnolia. So he might want to do it for a broader range. And so the tool has the ability to let us get to having community conversations. And Debbie shared a template with us that they had done in San Francisco with the exact same discussion around how do you talk to people without scaring them or making them think you're waving your hands as Chicken Little, or, you know, how do you get some real positive action out of this, which if nothing is community building, you know, or the people who are going, yes, you're right. We need to get the city to fix, I see you, Frank. We need to get the city to fix our unreinforced masonry elementary schools. You know, there's some discussion that can come out of this. And the last 2 bullets on it are, we're just still trying to make sure we understand the data and are comfortable. And she's writing a user guide for us to be able to speak it better. So Frank?
yes, given that it was done in the San Francisco area, I'd be interested to hear, there's the built community, the demographic community, and the natural environment. Those are the 3 statistical areas that One Concern uses. And I'm curious, with the high Latino or Latinx population in the San Francisco area, that community sharing, is there any intention to use any interpreters or bilingual at any point? Or is that, say, maybe
That's on us. That's
Okay.
on us.
Okay.
You know, if you're like, I've got that here in Morgan, right? Somali and Vietnamese. And so absolutely, this is why we did that whole series on how do you do outreach to your community? How do you include them in the conversation? Because they live there right there with you, right? So, you know, so various threads of what we've been working on in the past are all starting to weave together. I'm going to go back, and also I passed over Erica's question. She's got some questions about the science. That is always a deep dive. So does anybody have any general questions first? We do not know where we're going, and we don't know how fast we're going there, but we know we want to go somewhere. So that's kind of the summary of where we're at from tonight. Any other questions? And then Erica. Okay, Erica, go for it.
Okay, so these are for Debbie. And yeah, I'm glad you waited for me last, because I'm probably going to go rapidly into the weeds real quick.
Well, I'll pull out because, you know, people are going to go in, and we only got 10 minutes left here. So,
Okay. So Debbie, just to give you a little bit of context, I have a PhD in geophysics.
Yay.
Yeah.
so we can all leave and you two can, so, Erica, I'm going to ask you to ask the questions first that are most relevant to the hub captains. We can keep this meeting going as long as you want for you guys to have a technical, but it has to benefit everybody.
Yep, I got them. So the first one I'll start with then is, okay, first one I'll start with is, since it was already mentioned, was about the magnitude for the Seattle fault modeled. A lot of information has indicates that the upper range would actually be a 7.0, and a lot of the information we've already seen distributed by government agencies you typically use a 6.7. So I was wondering about what was the rationale for modeling as a 7.2?
Yeah, and I'll explain the magnitudes for all of them. So the models that, or the magnitudes that were used for each of these scenario earthquakes, besides Nisqually, which actually happened, was based on the USGS National Hazard Map. They have specific earthquakes that they model that go into their hazard map. And they have, Erica, you'll know this term, they have shake maps on the USGS website for those. We pulled directly from those. So these are modeled by USGS, and we took the ground motions directly from USGS. We didn't make them up ourselves.
And then the other thing I have to add is that the Hazard Explorer is a 7.3. So everybody's a little bit different, but they're all up in that 7.2, 7.3 range, so that the planners have at least have a number baseline and it's not all over the map.
And we're not showing the most likely earthquakes because those would be small. We're showing some upper end possibilities, knowing that they are unlikely to occur, but that you want to maybe plan for a little outside your comfort zone within the realm of what's possible.
Yeah, you're going to go to a higher confidence level.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay, so since it was referenced, I'm going to jump forward. About the USGS shake map that is on the Seattle Hazard Explorer. If you look at that shake map, it does not seem to agree with what was just shown, at least not if you're focusing on the Seattle fault, because it tends to show for the southern portion of this, like the West Seattle sector, it shows it as a much lower shake hazard, whereas for your system is showing it as the highest shake hazard. So what's the reason for the disconnect between those two?
Good question. I don't know which strand of the Seattle fault they're modeling for the Hazard Explorer, but I think we're modeling the southern strand, if I'm not mistaken. I can confirm that for you, but it might just be a strand that's modeled for their event versus ours.
I'm going to do a little facilitating. Hang on. Erica, you're diving in the weeds, and I'm happy to have the meeting stay where you and Debbie can talk, and we can let hub captains who are going, my brain is blown up. Let me just interrupt and go, does anybody have any questions or thoughts about where we want to go next? I mean, are you okay with letting our team of sector folks get in and go, how can we construct community conversations? I think if there's anybody who wants to help us, please put your name in the chat, because everybody's been a volunteer who said, this looks really interesting, and we had no idea what we were getting into. And they were, generally the people interested in using the tool. Having the conversation is a whole different thing. So we could use some good communication skills, or people who know what it's going to be like to talk to their community and want to make sure that the messaging is shaped in a way that's useful for all communities. So, okay, yeah, keep putting them in the chat, and then that way I can collect it out later and we'll add you to the and-on discussion team. And I don't think Debbie has sent out the template that was done in San Francisco. Should we do that, Debbie? Not yet?
I mean, we could.
Okay, I think we'll do that. The thing with the city is they've asked us not to go trotting out to the communities. They're really trusting that we're going to be responsible in how we, have these conversations. So you're going to get it, and it's going to say, do not distribute. And Debbie will have to make sure that's I'll send that out to the hub captains and make that very clear. But at least you can see what was discussed with another community. And please think through the context of your community and go, yes, this is a high enough level with enough detail where I can get my community to start talking about, where would we put shelters? Where can we have partners? How will we engage the grocery stores? For anybody who's wants to do that, sometimes it's going to bounce over to a community council to have that role. You as hub captains are really just the, kind of the messengers on some of this, going, now I know I'm really prepared for really red stuff if this earthquake goes off. So you know, that's where we're at. We're going to explore. We'll probably have this as an ongoing topic on the hub captains for a little bit. And we know that we won't be having community conversations until the winter months when everybody's, you know, back indoors all the time. Anybody else have any questions? And then I'm going to turn it, I'm going to say, if you don't want to stay for the technical discussion, you can go. Just making sure there's nobody else with anything I'm missing here.
And before people take off, I just want to say thank you for the time. And I put my email address in the chat. So if you have additional questions that come to mind, please email me.
And Erica did say, like, for example, I'm going to do a group called the District 1 Community Network, which is all our neighborhood groups, you know, kind of like a district council thing. And Debbie is willing to come to those larger presentations and do the talking for the technical stuff like she did tonight. So again, this is a joint partnership with a lot of people who can make a difference. And so don't think you're out there doing it on your own. And let me scan through. So Mike Ruby says, yep, the owners of URMs and commercial buildings, that is a big hot topic at the community council that keeps getting stalled. They don't do anything on it. Yep, guidance. When do you get the tool? Yeah, you're not going to get the tool right away unless you join the team, because this tool is so complicated. Poor Frank, he's lost hair over this one. So we'll slowly add people, but it's an admin's nightmare for Debbie, because we keep punching the buttons that ends the simulation for the entire city. So we're limiting access right now. Who was it that asked me that? Oh, Catherine. Oh, yeah. Okay, Catherine, you would be a great addition to our team. Okay, so any last chance for hands? Okay, if you don't want to stay.
What the team is you're talking about putting together?
Well, right now there's 6, there's 8 of us. We got 1 volunteer for each sector to do that local analysis. So that's all we've got right now. So we're adding the people to say, let's do community conversations. So we're forming the team as we fly here. Okay, so put your name in and I'll capture the chat. And if there's no other questions, you're welcome to go or stay for the, I know that a lot of you are interested in the science, but some aren't. So we'll go ahead and let Erica finish her questions now. Sorry about that, Erica. Thank you.
Okay, that's okay. So I actually only had one more question. And I am trying to make this general because I'm referencing information that is available on the web. And I know I do have people in my sector or my hub area that they're checking this stuff. They look on the web, and I would need to be able to explain why there is a difference in the what in the 2 different sort of streams of information. So my last question about the simulation that was done for the Seattle fault is it looks like you only modeled the southern thrust fault, and that there's also a northern thrust fault that runs through Harbor Island and Admiral. And I'm curious why you selected the southern thrust fault and not the northern.
It's a good question. I'm trying to remember why. I think it might have been a decision. Oh, I remember. The city made the decision. So they have been using the exact simulation that we ran for what's called THIRA planning. It's like threat and hazard investigation analysis and risk analysis. There we go. So that's something that they've been using for their planning, is that specific scenario on, I think, the southern strand. And there are also regional partners who've been looking at that same event. And so they wanted to stay consistent with that.
Okay. Was it based on that there is current research to suggest that one's much more likely to activate? Or
I can't speak to their rationale behind why they chose that one, unfortunately.
That's all my questions. Thank you.
Oh, I was waiting for a good scientific deep dive now. Oh, anybody else have science questions? I mean, once you see this tool, you will be asking lots more questions, but you know. Okay, Anne had a really good point that the Hazard Explorer anybody can use, and it's really user friendly. It's got all its explanations built in, and you know, it's easy to remember from time to time when you use it. Just go along the tabs and pick your different hazard. And so, all right, so we'll have this on the agenda. I will go through who has offered to help out on continuing conversations on this. And then I'll make sure that I'm not going to overstep my boundaries when we send the San Francisco example out to people. We just are proceeding really carefully with the city, because the last thing we want to do is have them go, nope, we put a dangerous tool in the hands of amateurs and we probably shouldn't have done that. So we're just trying to be really careful before we send stuff out. So, okay. I think we get to end on time. Holy moly. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Debbie, for all your help. And thank you for all the sector folks who put all this time in. It was probably at least 10 hours worth of work on the part of each person to do that hub safety analysis, as we learn the tool. So I really appreciate everybody plowing in and doing that. So, all right. I am going to save the chat and save the poll and let you all go. So thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody.
Hi, everyone.